February 19th, 1945. Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands. The wind carried the sting of sulphur as Private First Class Samuel Sam Delaney of the 5th Marine Division lay flat against the volcanic ash, his heart slamming like a rifle bolt cycling too fast. The invasion had begun only hours earlier, yet already the beach behind him was a growing graveyard of burning tractors, shattered amphibious vehicles, and Marines struggling to crawl forward under invisible fire. The constant thump of Japanese mortars shook the ground like a heartbeat coming from the island itself. Delaney, barely 22 years old, wiped grit from his eyes and tried to stop his hands from trembling. He had survived Bougainville, but nothing, not jungle fighting, not close-quarters ambushes, felt anything like this. Ahead of him rose the first layer of Japanese defences. Low, jagged mounds of volcanic rock that hid the openings to a honeycomb of pillboxes, tunnels, machine gun snipers, and murder holes carved by General Kuribayashi's engineers. The island's defenders were invisible, dug deep, and protected by steel-reinforced bunkers that Japanese engineers had spent months preparing for this very day. Every American advance stalled against the same obstacle. Grenades thrown into bunker apertures rolled right back out, sometimes kicked back like pebbles, sometimes tossed back with chilling precision by defenders who knew each second of Marine hesitation was another chance to kill them. Delaney's squad had been pinned for almost 2 hours. Sergeant Bill Harper, his voice harsh from smoke and shouting, crouched behind a chunk of basalt and pointed toward a rectangular firing slit about 40 yards ahead. "That bunker is chewing through Baker Company," he growled. "We need to shut it down before they wipe out the whole line." 2 Marines had already tried. Both were now motionless in front of the bunker, one draped over a ridge of rock, the other collapsed in the ash, his grenade having been thrown back at him before the pin he'd pulled even hit the ground. Delaney's throat tightened as he stared at the bodies. He had trained for months, drilled endlessly, thrown hundreds of grenades on the range, but the terrain, the angles, and the Japanese defenders' skill made everything feel useless. Fragmentation grenades, the standard American Mach 2 Pineapple, exploded outward, projecting shrapnel in every direction. They were deadly in open air, but in the tight, narrow mouths of Japanese bunkers, their fragments did little more than ricochet off thick concrete. The blast was loud, the smoke dramatic, but the defenders inside were often left completely unharmed. Delaney pressed his helmet deeper into the ash as a machine gun burst snapped over his head. Harper yelled again, "Delaney, you're the closest! Get a frag in there!" He forced a nod, then crawled forward, keeping his body as flat as he could. Ash clung to his sweat-soaked uniform. The bunker's firing slit glowed briefly from muzzle flashes. Every step felt like he was crawling inside a rifle barrel. He reached a shallow depression in the ground, pulled a Mach 2 grenade from his pouch, and held it tightly. He counted breaths. He waited for a pause in the firing, just 1 second of silence. Then he pulled the pin, rose to his knees, and hurled it hard through the narrow opening. A shout came from inside the bunker. For a fraction of a second, Delaney tasted victory until the grenade shot back out like a stone kicked from a boot. It landed 2 feet away. He dove sideways as the explosion lifted black ash into the air and peppered his arms with tiny fragments. His ears rang. Harper yelled something, but Delaney couldn't hear. His hearing returned slowly, first the deep thumping of naval shells offshore, then the rattle of machine gun fire, and then the unmistakable metallic clink of another Mach 2 grenade rolling on rock. Only it wasn't one of theirs. He lunged backward as a Japanese grenade exploded near the lip of the depression, sending up a burst of grey smoke that smelled sharp and chemical. These Japanese grenades, Type 97s, were infamous for unreliable fuses. Some exploded too quickly, some too slowly, and some didn't explode at all, but this one was perfect. Delaney slammed into the ground, gasping for air, his face stinging. For 20 more minutes the squad tried everything: rifle grenades, suppressing fire, even a flamethrower team that was cut down before getting within range. A medic pulled bodies back behind the rocks and whispered to Delaney, "Bunker's too deep. They're not using normal firing slits. They've got internal blast rooms. Frags won't do a damn thing. Delaney pressed his forehead into the ash and breathed hard. That was when he saw it, half buried in the black sand beside the body of a Marine runner who had been carrying ammunition. It was an odd shape, smooth, heavy, nothing like the Mach 2 pineapple. It was an American Mach 3 concussion grenade, rare, cylindrical, used mostly by engineers and assault teams. Unlike fragmentation grenades, the Mach 3 produced almost no shrapnel. It delivered pure blast, an enormous shockwave that crushed lungs, ruptured eardrums, and bounced around inside enclosed spaces like a hammer swinging in a steel box. It was exactly the kind of grenade Marines weren't supposed to use for clearing Japanese bunkers. He picked it up, brushing off ash. The fuse assembly was intact. It was heavier than he expected. It felt wrong compared to the grenades he'd trained with. Harper saw him inspecting it. "Where the hell did you get that?" Delaney explained. Harper cursed under his breath. "Engineers use those. They're not standard issue for rifle squads, and command doesn't want them tossed near friendlies. Too much overpressure." Delaney hesitated. Then he looked again at the bunker, looked at the Marines bleeding on the slope, looked at Baker Company pinned and dying. He made a decision he wasn't supposed to make. He crawled forward again, gripping the Mach 3 like a lifeline. He reached the same depression, waited for the muzzle flashes to dim, and pulled the pin. This time, he didn't throw it through the firing slit. He threw it against the wall, letting it drop down into the recessed blast chamber that Japanese engineers built to catch American grenades. The explosion that followed didn't sound normal. It wasn't sharp and metallic. It was deep, a brutal, concussive thud that kicked up a cloud of volcanic ash and sent a shockwave that thumped through Delaney's ribs. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then smoke began drifting from the bunker's firing slit. Harper whispered, "Holy hell, you cracked them open." Delaney blinked, stunned. He hadn't intended to improvise. He hadn't intended to break rules. But for the first time that morning, a Japanese bunker had gone silent. He didn't know it yet, but this tiny act, this accidental discovery, would become the technique he used to clear 20 Japanese bunkers in a single day, pushing through some of the thickest resistance on Iwo Jima. And it all started with one grenade he wasn't even supposed to have. As he crawled back to Harper, another explosion rocked the ground, much farther up the slope. The Marines were advancing again, trying to break through the defensive line. "Delaney," Harper barked. "You're with me. Grab every one of those things you can find. We're going bunker hunting." Delaney swallowed hard. The battlefield stretched ahead. Smoke, fire, ash, screaming. The metallic taste of blood and gunpowder. And in the middle of it, a private barely old enough to shave was about to attempt something no one had trained him for. He nodded, tightened his grip on the Mach 3 grenade, and prepared to do the impossible. And that was the beginning. Delaney barely had time to catch his breath before Harper shoved 2 more Mach 3 concussion grenades into his hands. They were scraped, ash-coated, and dented from rolling off dead engineers' pouches, but the fuses were good. Around them, the volcanic dust storm of battle thickened. Aircraft overhead strafed deeper positions. Naval guns thundered offshore, and Japanese defenders shifted fire to compensate for the sudden silence in the bunker Delaney had just neutralized. Harper tapped Delaney's shoulder. "You just opened a lane for the whole platoon. We push now, or we die here." Delaney nodded, though his legs shook violently. He had never led an assault. He had never been the tip of anything. But now every Marine in 2 companies looked at the small gap he had created and saw the first crack in a wall none of them had been able to break through all morning. He turned toward the next bunker, this one larger, with dual firing slits and an internal exit on the far side. A classic Japanese design, kill zone in front, escape tunnel in back, reinforced roof a foot thick. Flamethrower teams normally cleared these, but the nearest tank with a flamethrower unit had been knocked out by a mine hours earlier. A Marine with a broken leg clutched his knee and whispered, "Someone's got to shut that throat up." Delaney crawled uphill again, this time with 2 squad mates covering the slit with bar fire. The muzzle flashes flickered inside like angry sparks. He slid into a shallow fold in the ground, nothing more than a depression formed by earlier shelling, and pulled the pin on another Mach 3 grenade. He remembered the blast of the first one, the way the shockwaves seemed to bounce off rock and dig into the ground. He threw this one low again, purposefully short, skipping it like a stone along the ash. It hit the recessed wall beneath the firing slit and dropped into the hidden chamber where the defenders always redirected American grenades. The explosion slammed into the ground with a deep, metallic pulse. Smoke vented from the firing slit, thicker this time, dark, drifting upward like a black flag surrendering to the wind. The machine gun fell silent. But then, to Delaney's horror, a secondary blast erupted from inside the structure. The bunker shook like something had detonated from within. Harper's eyes widened. "You hit their ammo reserve!" The internal blast chamber must have stored crates of Type 97 grenades or rifle rounds. The concussion wave had thrown everything into shock ignition. The result? A firestorm curling through a system never meant to contain it. Delaney ducked as the bunker roof seemed to lift half an inch, then settle again. Smoke poured from every crack. The two Japanese defenders inside stumbled out of the rear escape tunnel, ears bleeding, stumbling like sailors on a swaying deck. One collapsed instantly from bar fire. The other tried to raise his rifle before falling onto the ash. Word spread fast. A private had cracked 2 bunkers using grenades Marines rarely touched. A lieutenant from Fox Company sprinted over the rocks toward him. "Private, do that again. We need a lane cleared to reach the 3rd ridge." His voice was raw, already hoarse from shouting orders over non-stop machine gun bursts. Before Delaney could respond, a flare arced overhead, green sputtering smoke as it drifted down. Then artillery shrieked in from the north. Marines screamed for cover. Japanese guns from Mount Suribachi's approach had reoriented faster than expected. Delaney threw himself behind a protruding chunk of volcanic rock as heavy shells pounded the slope, throwing black geysers into the sky. The world shrank to concussion, dust, heat, and the strange sensation of ash falling like snow across his helmet. When the barrage finally ceased, the battlefield looked almost unfamiliar, craters deeper, ridges carved into new shapes, Marines coughing through clouds of debris. Harper grabbed Delaney. "You alive?" Delaney shook off ash and nodded. "Where's the next bunker?" Harper pointed to a structure almost invisible behind smoke. A taller, multi-chamber pillbox with reinforced concrete thick enough to deflect all but the heaviest of ordnance. 3 Marines had already tried to approach. 2 were dead, one screaming for a corpsman with half his face covered in blood. Delaney crawled forward again, this time with a flamethrower specialist named Ortiz. Ortiz was 24, broad-shouldered, and already exhausted from hauling the 60-pound tank on his back. "You get me to that slit," he said. "I'll give them hell." But Delaney knew what would happen. Japanese defenders often had internal blast breaks specifically angled to neutralize flame bursts. The burning fuel often never reached the defenders. They built bunkers like puzzles designed to kill hope. Delaney held up a hand. "Let me try something first." He reached into the pouch where he'd stashed 2 additional Mach 3 grenades. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something more dangerous. Rising confidence. He crawled ahead alone, inch by inch, chest pressed to the ground. Japanese rifle fire snapped overhead. Machine guns spat bursts that sent ash pluming around him. He thought of home, of Kansas wheat fields, of his mother telling him war would change him, of the friends he lost on Bougainville. He reached the bunker's flank, a zone shielded from its forward fire slit. He listened closely. Inside were voices, short, disciplined, clipped. The defenders didn't panic like the ones in the earlier pillbox. They were professionals. He pulled the pin, held the grenade with both hands, and whispered to himself, "Drop low." He bounced the grenade against the base of the structure. It rolled downward into another internal trench used for catching explosives. The muffled thud that followed had the same bone-jarring resonance as before, but this one triggered something else. The roof didn't simply shake. It cracked. Concrete dust drifted down like grey powder from heaven. Then Ortiz rushed in. "That's my cue." He stepped forward and fired a stream of burning fuel through the compromised firing slit. The cracked roof funneled heat downward, turning the chamber into a furnace. Screams rose inside, brief, ragged, human, then silence. Delaney stared at the smoke curling upward, shocked by the violence he had just helped unleash. Harper slapped his shoulder. "3! You just knocked out 3 bunkers in one push!" But they were still only at the second ridgeline. Ahead lay a maze of interlocking fortifications, bunkers feeding into tunnels, tunnels feeding into sniper holes feeding into deeper chambers carved into the very bones of Iwo Jima. Around noon, Delaney and his squad moved east, following a coordinate path assigned by a captain who kept shouting into a radio that barely worked through the static. Every few minutes, a shell or mortar would crash into the ground, sending shattered obsidian flying. At one point, a Japanese sniper nearly hit Delaney, the bullet slicing open his sleeve. Harper took the sniper out with a semi-automatic burst, but the closeness of the round made Delaney's heart hammer like it was trying to escape his chest. Then came the bunker that nearly ended him. It was recessed into a larger cave structure, partially hidden by volcanic formations twisted like broken tree trunks. A machine gunner inside had been firing for hours, sweeping arcs across the ridge and halting the advance of an entire platoon. Several Marines lay dead in front of it, their bodies contorted at odd angles. No one had been able to get within 40 yards. But Delaney spotted something unusual, a small ventilation pipe at the top of the structure, barely visible through ash. He motioned Harper over. "Give me 2 minutes." Harper grabbed his arm. "Delaney, don't try something that'll get you turned into paste. We need you alive." Delaney didn't answer. He crawled alone along a shallow trench carved by an earlier shell impact. It curved upward, placing him behind the bunker but exposed to snipers somewhere in the rocks higher up. He moved quickly, ignoring the pinpricks of ash burning into his palms. When he reached the vent pipe, he pulled the pin on another MiG-3 grenade, shoved it into the vertical shaft, and covered his ears. The explosion blasted straight downward like a cannon firing the wrong direction. Smoke erupted from the firing slit, and the machine gun fell silent. Marines watching from below let out a collective shout, half surprise, half disbelief. Ortiz started laughing. "You kidding me, kid? That's 4, in under an hour." But Delaney wasn't smiling. The weight of each explosion, the shockwave in his bones, the smell of burned cordite, the echo of dying men, pulled at him. He didn't know how many he could survive. He didn't know how many grenades remained scattered across the battlefield. But he knew one thing, the Marines around him were depending on him now. They reached the next ridge. The ground here was uneven, carved with trenches and reinforced firing pits. Japanese defenders hid in positions so well camouflaged that even point-blank rifle fire couldn't flush them out. Mortar fire rained down every 10 minutes. Corpsmen hauled wounded men downhill, slipping on ash and blood. A major appeared, pointing at a cluster of 5 bunkers. "We need these neutralized by sundown or the entire line collapses. Tanks can't get through. Engineers are down." "Who's clearing bunkers in this sector?" Harper pointed at Delaney. The major stared. "A private?" Harper nodded. "A private who's redefining the manual." The major didn't laugh. He simply asked, "How many concussion grenades do we have left?" Delaney opened his pouch. Only one remained, but the battlefield was littered with possibilities. He searched dead engineers, overturned ammo boxes, a demolished demolition team's supply bag, eventually gathering 7 more Mecha-3 grenades, each with intact fuses. He looked toward the 5 bunkers. Smoke drifted across the slope in lazy currents. The sun behind the haze cast a reddish glow over everything. The air tasted metallic, full of heat and dust. He clenched his jaw. He was going to take them. All of them. And the day wasn't over. Delaney crouched low, his breath heavy, ash clinging to the sweat on his face. The sun had shifted west, glowing orange through the drifting smoke. The battlefield had changed tones, from grey to red, from morning chaos to afternoon desperation. Marines around him were exhausted, dehydrated, covered in volcanic dust that made every man look ghostly. But they were still pushing, inch by inch, toward ridges the Japanese had carved into death traps long before the Americans landed. The 5 bunkers ahead formed a network, interlocked firing arcs, overlapping kill zones, deep internal chambers connected by tunnels. No single bunker could be approached without coming under fire from at least 2 others. It was a perfect defensive cluster, designed to swallow entire companies. Delaney swallowed hard. He felt the weight of the Mech 3 grenades in his pouch. He had 8 total. Not enough, he thought, until he reminded himself that earlier he had done more with fewer. Harper crawled up beside him, face streaked with grime. "Those bunkers are going to murder every man on this ridge if we don't shut them down. We'll cover you. Just don't die." Delaney nodded. "I'll try." He moved out again, low to the ground. Japanese machine guns immediately stitched the ash 2 feet to his left. He rolled into a depression carved by an artillery round and stayed still until the firing paused. He heard Japanese voices inside the first bunker, urgent, precise, confident. They weren't afraid. They knew their position was nearly impenetrable. He pulled a Mach 3, steadied his hand, and counted his breath. 3 seconds. 2. 1. He threw low and short, aiming not for the firing slit but the angled stone below it, just like before. The grenade bounced once, twice, then dropped into a hidden drain channel running beneath the bunker's base. The explosion hit like a dull, physical punch. Smoke puffed out of the slit. The machine gun fell silent. But there was no secondary blast this time, no internal ammo cooking off, just confusion and then movement. 2 Japanese soldiers stumbled out the rear escape tunnel, coughing violently. They were met by Marine rifle fire. The bunker was crippled, but not destroyed. Not yet. Harper signaled, "Move to the next." Delaney ran crooked across the ash as bullets cracked overhead. He slid behind a low wall of black rock, shielding himself from the bunker directly above him. This one was taller, built into a natural hollow that amplified its fields of fire. Marines had tried to assault it all morning, but every approach turned into a massacre. Delaney spotted a small opening, just a crack, near the bunker's base. It wasn't a firing slit, it was a ventilation gap, part of the cooling system installed deep inside. If he could get a blast into that... But the angle was bad. He needed to get closer. Much closer. He crawled forward, inches at a time. Twice he froze when snipers fired, one round ricocheting off a rock an inch above his helmet. He exhaled slowly, kept going, and finally reached the crack. He could feel warm air pulsing from it, heat from the defenders inside. He pulled the pin. Instead of throwing, he placed the grenade directly against the opening and used a stone to wedge it inside. He counted 2 seconds, then shoved himself backward, rolling down the slope. The explosion was deeper than before. It didn't sound like a normal blast. It sounded like a pressure wave collapsing through every tunnel in the structure. The ground shifted beneath him. Inside, he heard shouting. Japanese defenders screamed, a sound ripped by concussion, not fire. Smoke billowed from the tiny opening, curling upward in thick, violent plumes. The roof didn't crack. It bowed. The bunker fell silent. "2 down!" Harper yelled, voice breaking with adrenaline. "Keep going! Keep going!" Delaney didn't feel triumphant. Each blast etched something heavier into him. The knowledge that he was ending lives, close, violent, immediate. He felt the weight of every grenade, every decision, but he also saw Marines pushing forward, wounded men being dragged back to safety, a corpsman crying while bandaging a friend's stump of a leg, officers shouting for medics who were already overwhelmed. He knew the truth. If he didn't keep going, dozens of Marines would die in the next hour. He reached the next bunker, the third of the cluster. This one was shaped differently, low, flat, with 2 machine guns set into a staggered slit. It had deflected a tank round earlier that day, leaving a scorched but intact wall. A flamethrower team tried to get close. They didn't make it. The gunner fell almost immediately. The tank operator stumbled back with a hole through his shoulder. The fuel tank clanged to the ground, hissing. Delaney crawled to the tank and dragged it behind cover. Ortiz limped toward him. "You want to use this thing? It's nearly empty." Delaney shook his head. I need a distraction. Ortiz nodded. I can give you 3 seconds, no more. Delaney moved around the side, getting close enough to hear the Japanese voices inside. He felt the heat again. The bunker's interior ran hot from constant gunfire. He pulled the pin on another Mach 3. Ortiz gave the signal and opened fire, not with flame, but with his Thompson, sweeping a hail of bullets across the slit. The Japanese defenders ducked instinctively. That was all Delaney needed. He sprinted the last 8 feet, dropped the grenade into the recessed pit below the slit, and dived backwards as machine guns erupted again. The blast hit like a hammer. Smoke, ash and dust burst outward. Marines shouted. Ortiz yelled, "That's 3! 3!" Delaney's ears rang so loudly that the world dropped into muffled silence. He lay on his back, staring at the sky, watching a burning Corsair spiral down somewhere over the horizon. He wondered if the pilot had time to eject. He wondered how many men on the island would die before nightfall. Harper dragged him back to cover. "You good?" Delaney nodded weakly. "You don't look good." "I'm fine," Delaney whispered, though he wasn't sure. He stood. His legs shook. He didn't care. 2 more bunkers in this cluster remained. The 4th bunker was embedded deep, only the firing slit visible between 2 slabs of volcanic rock. The entrance was concealed behind a trench that crossed Japanese defensive zones. American artillery had tried to collapse it earlier, but the shell landed short. Delaney saw something, a faint shimmer in the ash. A tripwire? No. A vent line. A small pipe barely wide enough for a grenade fuse assembly. He approached on his belly, brushing ash away until the metal pipe became visible. It led directly toward the bunker's interior. He didn't hesitate. He slid another Mach 3 grenade into the pipe and tapped it until it vanished inside. He rolled away and counted. 1, 2. The explosion blew a chunk out of the bunker's side. Marines gasped as part of the structure lurched inward. Smoke erupted like a miniature volcano. A Japanese defender stumbled out, disoriented, and was met by Marine rifle fire. Another followed seconds later. Then silence. 4 down. Only one of the cluster remained. But the last bunker was the worst of all. Built into a natural cave, reinforced with steel beams, it had 2 machine guns, 1 mortar pit, and at least a dozen defenders. Clearing it should have required tanks, engineers, flamethrowers, and explosives, all working in unison. The Marines had none of that, only rifles, bars, and Delaney's remaining grenades. Harper's voice was low. "You don't have to do this." Delaney looked at the bunker, at the Marines crouched in shell holes, waiting for someone, anyone, to make the first move, at the corpsman hauling another wounded man downhill through swirling ash. "I have to," he said quietly. He approached from the blind side, using a narrow crevice between rocks as cover. The machine gun inside chattered in long, controlled bursts, cutting down any Marine who tried to get close. Snipers fired from deeper recesses, forcing men to hug the ground. Delaney crawled until he reached the cave mouth. He could barely see inside, only dark shapes and flickers of movement. He pulled a grenade, then another. He had 4 left. He tossed the first 2 simultaneously, bouncing them along the wall toward the internal blast chamber. The explosions shook the ground, but Japanese fire continued almost instantly afterward. They were shaken, but not broken. He grit his teeth, sweat stinging his eyes. He had 2 grenades left, 2 chances. He spotted it, a narrow drainage chute carved into the rock. He had used this trick earlier. It was angled downward. If he could get a blast deep enough inside... He pulled the pin, slid the grenade into the chute, and pressed himself flat as it clattered down into darkness. The explosion that followed was different. A delayed echo. A deep roar followed by a scream that cut off abruptly. Then a second explosion, accidental ignition inside their ammo storage. The cave glowed for an instant with internal flames. Smoke billowed upward. The machine gun fell silent. Japanese defenders fled the rear tunnel, some bleeding from ears or nose, some stumbling blindly. Marines opened fire, ending the last resistance from the cluster. Harper caught Delaney by the arms. 5. You took 5 in 20 minutes. That's 8 today. No, Delaney realized. Counting the earlier bunkers, it was more. He whispered, almost to himself, "We're not done." The ridge ahead contained more bunkers, smaller ones, hidden ones that Marines had crawled past, only to be shot from behind moments later. By late afternoon, Delaney had neutralized 13, then 16, then 18. His arms shook with every throw, his hearing faded in and out, his hands bled from gripping rocks and metal, his helmet was dented, his vision blurred from ash and dehydration. By the time he reached the 20th bunker, sun setting behind drifting smoke, Marines exhausted, some barely able to stand, he felt like he was moving through a dream. This bunker was small, nothing like the fortress-like structures earlier. A simple two-man pillbox guarding the approach to a shallow cave. But 2 men with a machine gun could still kill 30 Marines before nightfall. Delaney approached slowly. He threw his last grenade. It bounced perfectly, rolling into the slit and disappearing inside. A final dull blast sounded, followed by silence. Harper limped up beside him. 20, he murmured. You cleared 20. Marines behind them cheered weakly, exhausted beyond celebration. Some simply slumped to the ground, relieved to be alive. Corpsmen rushed to carry the wounded. Officers marked the cleared lane on their maps, noting that a private, just one private, had broken a defensive node expected to hold for days. Delaney sank to his knees, shaking uncontrollably. Harper knelt next to him. You all right, Sam? Delaney stared at the burning horizon, where black pillars of smoke swallowed the last of the sunlight. I don't know, he whispered. I just kept moving. Harper put a hand on his shoulder. What you did today saved an entire battalion, maybe more. Across the ridge, Marines who had been pinned for hours finally advanced. They stepped past destroyed bunkers, dead defenders, shattered fortifications that had once seemed invincible. Delaney watched them go, unable to stand. As darkness settled over Iwo Jima, the winds cooled, carrying the scent of sulfur, ash, and burned powder across the battlefield. Fires glowed faintly in the distance. Men huddled in shell holes, waiting for the next day's assault. Medics tended the wounded. Officers made notes. The dead were covered with ponchos. Delaney sat alone on a rock, staring at his empty grenade pouch. Harper returned with a canteen, handing it to him. You want to know the truth? He said quietly. Command doesn't care what grenades you used. You got us through. That's what matters. Delaney drank slowly. The water tasted like metal and smoke. He looked at the ridge he had cleared, 20 bunkers in one day. I just hope it was enough, he whispered. Harper nodded. For today it was. Tomorrow we fight again. The night deepened. Artillery flashed in the distance. Marines slept where they could. And Private Samuel Delaney, just a kid from Kansas, sat in silence on the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, knowing that on this single day, through improvisation, luck, courage, and the wrong grenades, he had done something no training manual had ever imagined. It didn't make him a hero to himself, but to every man still alive because of him, it was everything.